Without further ado, I don't know if any of you have ever served on a search committee for a keynote speaker, but it was a really interesting experience for me. There's a lot of amazing people out there, and especially in this basin. So, we put together some thoughts and words of what we wanted, and those were community-based solutions, water, sustainability, motivation, inspiration, good speaker, those kinds of things, and we put those out there to some of the leaders in our basin. And the interesting thing is they led to a woman that's actually from out of the basin. And the name Diane Snyder might not be familiar to all of you in the basin, but her work and practices and ideals certainly are exactly what we are trying to do here. And we invited Diane for both, her leadership and her direction and her story. Diane Snyder is a fourth-generation resident of Wallowa County, and she's currently executive director for a group called Wallowa Resources, housed in Enterprise, Oregon. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, a very great small town. Diane's travels have led her all over, and in that, the one thing that she's really interested in doing is helping people by bringing people together. So it wasn't very hard to convince her to come and speak to you today and share her success story, share her inspiration, and hopefully provide some insight to us potentially. Sometimes we get so caught up in how we can be one basin, we sometimes forget that other people all over the world are dealing with these same issues. So I encourage you to listen to Diane's advice. She's been both a rancher who's raised cattle for 20 years on her family farm to an intense land use planner and community-based solutions provider, and was recently named by Oregon Business Magazines as one of the top 50 leaders in Oregon. So let's welcome Diane Snyder.
So hey, I'm going to start with a little bit of funkiness. I'd like to have lights up, and then we'll do lights down for a little while, and then lights up again. So can we have the lights for a minute? I'm going to adjust this mic so I can talk to you all. So greetings from Northeast Oregon. Greetings from Northeast Oregon. Thank you. So I truly am a woman of passion, and sometimes the passion is out of balance. And I just have to share with you a phone call message, because I couldn't take the call, I got from my grown daughter yesterday. It goes like this: Mom, I know you're out there somewhere doing your part to save the world. When you get a chance, I need your banana bread recipe. So I'm thinking about the comments I want to make to you all and the story that I want to share. And I actually started thinking about my grandma. Imagine that. You all have a grandma. Brings up kind of that warm feeling, right? And I remember my grandma, every time I went to her house, there was always fresh bread cooking, right? You could smell the yeast. And I always knew what time of year it was by what she was canning, right? And putting up for the next year. But the thing I remember most about my grandmother was her most prized possession. She had a player piano. And it had been in the family since it was constructed. So she guarded this coveted treasure very, very, very strictly. In fact, I remember when my cousin Tammy sat on the stool and peed her pants and stained the stool, it was just like devastating to my grandmother. And only when we were really, really good would she succumb to our pleas to play the player piano. And so I remember, taking down the little bevels, because it was, pushed by bevels in air, and carefully and gingerly putting the roll up there, and then beginning to start the player. And my favorite song on all of the rolls happened to be Don't Fence Me In. You all remember the song? Oh, give me land, lots of land. Yeah. So as I began to think about that song, I began to think about fences. So let's talk a little while about fences. So back in the days of open range, right? Fences were not seen as a benefit to people who were wanting to roam the landscape freely. And when I think about the years of the settlers, they used fences to kind of proclaim their stake. identify their interest. And to a certain degree, that still happens today. And of course, with my background in ranching, I definitely carry plenty of barbed wire scars. But when I'm thinking about contemplating fences in the abstract, right, the work that I'm working in now and the work that many of you are working in or embarking on is all about taking down those fences. It's taking down where those claims are staked and figuring out how are we going to figure this out together, because those local solutions are the best and the most long-lasting solutions. And those fences, for me, are barriers. Those fences are barriers to people working together. They're barriers to passing fish. They're barriers to cultural sites. They're barriers to using government incentives. So what can be done? So in keeping with our theme of Don't Fence Me In, I wanted to share 3 messages with you and then do a PowerPoint. So really, I'm going to put the messages out there, and if you just can't stand the PowerPoint, you can leave and you'll get the gist of everything, but let me tell you, I have some really pretty pictures to share. So, number 1, I want you to think about shared values. Take the time to identify your deeply held core values. Number 2 is collaboration. Create this space, work together, focusing on areas of common ground, and begin building trust. Number 3 is local actions create long-lasting solutions. Outside fixes to site-specific conditions rarely result in broad stakeholder support or long-lasting solutions. Local actions result in solutions that inform policymakers and decision makers. So I realize you are all doing some incredible work already, and I am incredibly pleased to be here to share with you one example that's happening in my home area, Wallowa County. And we're working really hard to forge a new future. So lights down. So I work with Wallowa Resources, which you heard, and Wallowa Resources is a community-based nonprofit organization. We were created by the community 10 years ago. In fact, in September, we celebrated, and I mean celebrated, our 10-year anniversary. It was a great event. I wanted to give you a little bit of context about Wallowa County. How many of you have been to Wallowa County, Oregon? Ooh, lots of you. It's a great place, huh? So for those of you who haven't been there, Wallowa County, as you can see, is in the northeast corner of Oregon. The green that you see is federal land. About 58% of Wallowa County is federally owned and managed by the United States government through the Forest Service. This place is incredibly diverse in terms of its people as well as its critters. There are 7,000 people that call this place home, and that equates to about 2.3 people per square mile, so pretty sparse. We, the largest town, there's 4 incorporated cities, the largest town is about 2,000 people. There's not a single stoplight in the whole county. There's no McDonald's, which is a data set we're really proud of. And one of our county commissioners, who you'll hear me reference many times, Ben Boswell. Ben Boswell talks about our economic condition in terms of our freeway access. And he argues, Wallowa County has freeway access. Our on-ramp just happens to be 75 miles long and in the next county. But with that comes a unique set of circumstances when we think about community health. In terms of biodiversity, we are home to Hell's Canyon, which is the deepest gorge in North America. And we're home to the Eagle Cap Wilderness, and those mountains peak out at almost 10,000 feet. There are 7 of the 8 existing life zones. We're missing the tropics. So when we think about the character of the area, the history's economic dependence upon natural resources, and the biodiversity that exists in the community, it's a place of incredible heritage. It's no wonder that Chief Joseph called that his summer home. So the story goes that we're harvesting timber and we are ranching, and we have a pretty significant tourist trade because it's such a beautiful area for many, many years. Wallowa Resources was created because of polarization around those interest groups and the activities that were happening on the landscape. Conflict around the timber wars began to happen in the late 80s. And in early 90s, the listing of our first endangered fish species was pending. So there was a lot of controversy going on, and it was really easy to hang our hat on, those environmentalists are appealing everything. But in fact, there was a lot more at play. The whole consultation process hadn't been figured out, and so the agencies really didn't know how to talk to each other to approve those projects. Industry was retooling, and that was reducing some jobs. There was a whole lot at play, but the fact is that during that course of time, by 1994, all 3 sawmills in the community shut down. That represented almost 20% of the highest paying jobs in our community gone poof. You can only imagine the fear in the community. And that exacerbated itself in many ways. I'm sure many of you know Wallowa County is the place that hung our environmental representatives in effigy on Main Street and burned the dummies. Now, I wasn't involved in that act, nor am I proud of it, but it gives you a sense of the level of fear and polarization that was happening in those early 90s. About 3 months later, some people tried to start the Forest Service building on fire. So again, I wasn't involved in that either, but wow, what did I do? So what was happening during that time is people were really afraid. Businesses were declining. We have this 75-mile on-ramp. We can't access a lot of the state and federal programs that have a cookie-cutter approach and have a larger criteria than we can even meet. So what are we going to do? And during that time, we were looking at our community for its economic future, which was an opportunity for us. But what we learned is that in every single sector, every single town, every single little dotted community, the importance of natural resources continued to reign as number one. Maintain that relationship with the land, maintain an economic relationship with the land and a working landscape, maintain the environmental health of our landscape and the critters that are there. So the other thing that happened was the county commissioners took a proactive approach to the listing of salmon and worked with the Nez Perce tribe to create a salmon habitat recovery plan. And about that time, an organization called Sustainable Northwest from Portland was looking for a place to begin helping communities facilitate this kind of dialogue. And Martin Goebel, who is the president of Sustainable Northwest, came and began to facilitate some of our conversations. So you can read that in a flash. It took us 2 years to get there. We're meeting monthly in the back room of the bakery, and we're having really intense conversations, and it's the good stuff, and it's the hard stuff, and it's the past management practices that are really tough to talk about, right? And it is the consequences of actions, but it's also the exciting stuff. What can we do in our future? What's next for us, and how can we get there? So we were really talking around the whole nexus of ecology, economy, and community, right? The trilogy around sustainability. Well, I'm talking about the early 90s, folks, right? And in my community, I don't know about yours, but that was a green word, sustainability. So even though the word sustainable was in Martin Goebel's organization's name, Sustainable Northwest, our county commissioner, Ben Boswell, who was calling the community together, said, Martin, try not to use that word. So Martin tried. And of course, everybody around the table, nobody knew about that side conversation, right? Nobody knew. But one day, Martin slipped and he said the S word. And the table was silent. People didn't know what to do with that word. Now, Howard Johnson enters the scene. Howard Johnson just passed away this last Easter at 93. Howard was managing his forest stand for years and years and years, and he'd retired at 60-something from ranching, so he was on his second career. Amazing man, huge heritage in the community. His grandfather was like the first white man to befriend Chief Joseph or something, but Howard was at every single meeting, and he's very quiet. But at that moment in time, Howard leaned forward and he said, well, Martin, I'm not too sure what's wrong with that word. After all, that's what we're talking about here. And it gave us permission. It gave us permission as a community to start talking about and defining for ourselves, what does that mean? In the context of where we are and the opportunities and all of the needs that we have to balance across the spectrum, where does that lead us? So we had several conversations. Many of them were around the underlying values, and I wanted to just share them really quickly because those underlying values for us were maintaining a place-based custom and culture of our community that leads to ecological health and stewardship of the land and creates opportunities for residents, their children, and future generations to continue making a living in the county. So in beginning the work, the community's talking about this organization. There's all kinds of diverse representatives at the table. In fact, we demanded that, trying to figure out the good stuff, have the hard conversations. What we learned is that there were some fundamental requirements to our work. First of all, we were going to have to work together. So, and I want to just diverge into another little story here. In 1989 was a time when the community existed and the Forest Service existed, right? There was no sense that the Forest Service was part of the community. You talked about the community and you talked about the Forest Service, but you didn't talk about them together. And we have, high disturbance ecosystems. We have lightning storms that come through. This happened to be the end of July in 1989. It was a very hot summer, hot, dry time. And not far from my ranch, there was a crew who was working, doing a logging operation, a local logger, well thought of. And this lightning storm came through. 170 strikes across the Wallowas and the Blue Mountains, some amazing amount. And a fire started about 3 miles from where this operator was working. So he radioed in and he said, "There's a fire up here. I've got my crews and my equipment here. I'm going to go up there and I'm going to put the fire out." And the Forest Service said, "Well, we just initiated this new certification program and you're not certified to do that." So the answer was no. Now, in defense of the agency, which the organization partners with incredibly now, they have to go through a prioritization, right? They have to figure out where are the priority strikes, because 170, how could they ever do that? And they didn't prioritize this strike high. What they didn't know is that 2 strikes would burn together the night before. 27,000 acres later, 20 families removed from their homes. And people in the community knowing that that logger could have put that fire out. You can imagine we had one pissed community. So I was telling this story about a year ago in a group of local people. And I was talking about, at that time, I remember, because I was there, I remember there was this unwritten rule that you don't wave at a green vehicle. That was when they still drove green vehicles. And this man in the audience said, "Yeah, and if you do, it's only with one finger." But there was a woman who was working for the Forest Service, and she said, "I worked for the Forest Service at that time, and we were told to wave at everybody." So I tell you that because that was a pivotal time in our community. That was the moment when the Forest Service and the leadership in the community figured it out. We're going to have to work together. We're going to have to work together and collaborate. We're going to have to understand each other's issues and in order for us to move forward. So some of the other pieces that we figured out in terms of fundamental requirements is that we were going to have to optimize financial transactions, right? We need to add value as much as we can to products that we have within our community. Teddy Roosevelt said, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." That's a big onus, it's a big foundation in terms of the organization that I'm working with. It's also really important that we share benefits equitably. When I think about an example I'll give here, when I think about systems that offer, I think, some real hope in value added, what's really, really important is that the producer sees a premium. The person that's working on the ground sees the premium, or it's not going to work. So really keeping an eye on making sure that those benefits are being shared equitably. The other thing that I realized was people don't feel like they're part of the decision-making process, right? We have all these government systems and studies and plans and analyses, and it's almost overwhelming. And at the end of the day, people don't feel like they are accountable for the decisions that are being made because they don't feel like they were part of the decision-making process. I had the opportunity to go up with that very same logger who was on the canal fire and didn't get to put it out. And he, early on when Wallowa Resources was being contemplated, and he took me to a stand of private timber that had been operated on recently, and he had not done the operation, but he took me there. And I was astounded because, not being a forester, it just didn't look like that land had been treated very well. And I thought, well, now, why would he bring me here? And he said, Diane, I brought you here because I need you to understand that sometimes as a logger, all I can do is turn around and kick a stump because I don't mark the trees. And I thought, wow. So we got to rethink how we work together so that we are engaging people who have the local knowledge, who've been working on the land in the decision-making process and in the implementation process. And the final piece is, for natural resource producers, in many cases, we have lost public trust. So it's very important for us to be talking about ways that we are rebuilding public trust. This is part of one of the mill workforces, and this picture actually was in the Wall Street Journal. And it was in there because of this dynamic relationship that was occurring between a nonprofit and a for-profit. So I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot other than to say that it's there and mention some of the successes we've had with that later on. But I wanted to give you a sense of where the community has come from, and this is, a little bit bleak. Our timber harvest declined over a 6-year period of time by 95%. And has remained at that low level for almost 12 years. We lost nearly 400 manufacturing jobs, and we've gained about 120 jobs in the service sector. So we've replaced family wage jobs with benefits, with jobs that are falling far below a family wage, and in fact, for the most part, are part-time. There's a great social impact that we're experiencing as a result of this economic transition. We're seeing increases in domestic violence, aid to single parents, juvenile crime, alcohol and drug use, and poverty, folks. The skilled workforce is in a mass exodus from the community, and those who remain are becoming more poor. Trust me, we're pulling the data. One of the jobs of the nonprofit is to trend and begin to look at some of these social indicators, and one of the indicators we use for this family piece are the percentage of families who qualify for the assisted school lunch program, and it is increasing. It's been 6 years now that my children have had the opportunity to go to school 4 days a week because none of the schools in the county afford to go 5. And the quality of education remains very high, but the quantity is poor. The quantity is poor because we don't have the funds to provide the extracurricular activities and to provide the electives, a broad sweep of electives that are there. And yet, while wages have increased 3% over the past 10 years, residential real estate has more than tripled in cost. So, now that you're summarily depressed, let's talk about what the collective we are doing about it. So, I'm going to make the assumption that many of you are familiar with the condition of forests in Northeast Oregon and know that those forest structures have been changed over time and now are in a situation where there are, many of them are fodder for catastrophic fire. And in addition to the loss of our infrastructure in terms of the mills, we also are having these issues with access to actually do some restoration, and that's one of the pieces that Wallowa Resources has been working on. So in light of this declining health of the land, as well as these worsening socioeconomic conditions, continuing demographic shift and conversion of land, loss of culture and local landscape knowledge, we set out to maintain our culture and our sense of place. We're creating strategic and non-traditional alliances within the community. We're creating incentives for public and private partnerships. We're creating non-traditional natural resource jobs, and we're re-engaging people in the decision-making process, all within the nexus of sustainable resource management. So I want to just give you a sense of some of the accomplishments of the organization over the past period of time and some of the diversity of our programs. We have our programs include watershed stewardship, education, business development, and community policy. It was interesting to learn that when we first began our work and we were working toward this nexus of economy, ecology, and community, and who would have thought that we would have hit barriers at the federal level. So very quickly we began to learn that we were going to have to work on policy issues in order to work on the ground. The work that's been conducted has really been conducted by the collective we. And I don't have a list here of partners, although I could very easily get you one, but it's longer than 2 of my arms, and I'm very proud of that. It's the Nature Conservancy, the Nez Perce Tribe. The county commissioners have overseen the process the entire time. It's local landowners, individuals, agencies, state and federal. Many, 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 many partners. What's really significant about that, what is really important for me to share, is that over the course of time, in the projects we're working on together, and I discovered this actually at a presentation where some of the partners were talking about some of the projects we do, right? Which, you know, we're the brainchild of Wallowa Resources, and then we bring partners in to work on them. And in these presentations, there were 3 individuals talking about projects. And do you know what they said? We. And then we. And then we. And I thought to myself, doggone it, we've done it, right? We're truly collaborating here because we're sharing ownership for the actions. So beginning in the year 2000, there were 2 contractors in our community who had the certifications to treat noxious weeds. We've now treated more than 20,000 acres of weeds, and there are currently more than 10 contractors in the community who are hiring 13 people in turn. The types of treatment are very diverse. They're using hand pulling, biological control, spot spraying, and aerial spraying. We've reinvigorated nearly 400 acres of aspen used by more than 75 different migratory birds, assessing their use and their change over time. All right. We've performed test trials with various types of equipment to reduce fuels in our forests and reduce capital risk to local entrepreneurs. We do this by helping fund projects that utilize new pieces of equipment, thereby ensuring some work to assist the equipment payments. We've created numerous jobs in fuels reduction, treating nearly 800 acres of wildland-urban interface. And historically, these services were captured by contractors from outside our community. And with the partnership, we've been able to build that capacity in our community, and they're continuing to work. One of those contractors has an 8-man crew, and the other a 12-man crew. We've performed a myriad of innovative upland habitat projects and introduced new ideas for water conservation and fish habitat. Just recently, I had a chance to spend some time with the fisheries biologist of the Forest Service, and we had been participating in a tour together, and so we were in the same vehicle. And of course, their fiscal year runs differently, right? Like October 1st to September 30th or whatever. And so he's pulling the numbers together in terms of their accomplishment. And he said, Diane, he said, we, again, collective we exceeded the target this year. And I said, wow, that's really great. And I said, so what did that look like? And he said, well, we have 22 miles of steelhead passage in accomplishment. I thought, wow, that's really great. And the funding came from Wallowa Resources for that restoration. And I said, wow, Alan, that's really great. And he said, you know, we were able to contribute our staff time, but that was it. Wow. I said, well, what was your target? And he said, oh, well, we targeted 5 miles. So through the partnership, we had more than 400% over the target. We've explored and implemented value-added processing that's consistent with the forest ecosystem condition and creates incentives for restoration and stewardship to secure the existing base of forest jobs by creating small-diameter wood utilization. We're licensed to manufacture and distribute erosion control devices made from small-diameter wood that results from fuels reduction projects, and to construct and sell watershed restoration and habitat enhancement products. We've begun classes for local students who perform restoration and monitoring activities, as well as a college-accredited course taught solely in Wallowa County. We're using place-based education, and we are incorporating local knowledge with science. We teach the teachers about natural resources using academics, as well as people who've been managing the resources for many years to again ensure that blending of local knowledge with science. We host numerous tours and visits of interested communities and groups. So Within this 10-year period of time, Wallowa Resources has made what I think are some pretty significant steps toward improving environmental health and community well-being. In addition to these pieces, we have also collectively begun watershed restoration that is community-led. We're using local contractors to do forest stand condition assessments, range condition assessments, riparian, road, recreation, and as a community, we're having the dialogue before the NEPA process. We have assessed 178,000 acres, and we are embarking on the next 172,000. So in the near future, we will have 352,000 acres assessed, and we are actively implementing projects in those watersheds through the partnership. So it's pretty clear that we have moved from a time of great controversy and fear to a time of being proactive about our future and working collectively for the greater good. I have a chance to speak every once in a while, and I like that. And I was in Wenatchee about a year ago, and I was talking about the 5 jobs, 5 at the time, that we had at the Value-Added Processing Center, the small diameter mill in Wallowa. And I noticed a woman in the front row rolled her eyes like, big deal, 5 jobs. And I thought, boy, you know, I need to put that data set in context. And so as soon as I got home, I called the state economist's office in La Grande, and I said, Jason, can you give me some kind of a comparison of the value of the 38 jobs that Wallowa Resources created or maintained in 2005 to an urban area? And he said, no problem. He called me back and he said, Diane, those 38 jobs are equivalent to 15,629 jobs in the Portland metropolitan area. I really want to thank you for allowing me to join you today and share our story of the power of we. And I'd really like to encourage you to approach the next couple of days you spend together, celebrating your achievements to date, recognizing that you are both the architects and the builders of a new model for conservation and community stability. And that is before and beyond regulatory hammers. It's with ideas and vision that's created by you collectively from the ground. And that's creating a new sense of community founded on our social fabric, our belief in doing the right thing, and our moral obligation and heartfelt desire to steward our land and our water. I challenge you to continue taking down the fences, forging new territory, and remembering your roots. Thank you.